Yo guys, what's up? In today's video, we're going to be talking about and we are going to learn how police can obtain your residential home address from your internet IP address. So in today's video, we're going to learn and find out how police can get your home address from your IP. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? So when you sign up with an internet service provider, that internet service provider is going to ask for your personal information. Now, some of that personal information that the internet service provider will ask you is your full name, which is your first and last name, your date of birth, your age. They may ask for a contact email address, and they will also ask for your home residential address. Now, you may say to yourself, well, hang on a minute, why would the service provider ask for my home residential address? Why would the service provider want to know where I live? Why do they need that information? And I'll tell you why they need that information. I'll tell you exactly why they require your home address to be given to them as information, to be logged in their system and database. I'll tell you right now why they request that kind of info. Now, the reason for that and the reason for them requesting your home address is because when you sign up with an internet service provider and when you want to connect to internet or be on an internet plan, that service provider needs to ship you a modem. Now, this modem is a white little box. It's called a router, a Wi-Fi modem, or a Wi-Fi box, however you want to call it. Now, this service provider needs to send you that Wi-Fi box to your address via courier so you can connect to the internet online. Because without that box, without that white box, that router, that Wi-Fi modem, you're not able to connect online. You are not able to connect to the internet without that box. So that service provider is going to need to somehow ship that Wi-Fi router to your address. And the only way they can do that is for you to give them your address. So this is one way the service provider can obtain your home address and get your address from you. A second reason why the service provider will want your address or want you to give them your address or obtain your address is to send you a bill. So when you sign up for internet, you are going to receive fortnightly bills in the mailbox, which will tell you the amount due to pay for your internet bill. So when you use internet, you are paying for it. So you're going to be getting bills sent to your mailbox directly. And that bill will tell you how much you need to pay that service provider for the internet you've used in that time period. So that's another reason an internet service provider would obtain your address or have your address or would ask you for your address, because they need to send you a physical printed sheet of paper, which is a bill statement to your physical mailbox telling you how much money is due or how much amount of money needs to be paid up front for the internet you've used in that period of time. So a bill is another reason your service provider has your address. Now, you may say to yourself, well, how would the police obtain my home residential address from my service provider? How can the police get my home address from my internet service provider? How can they find out where I live based on my IP address? What's this got to do with the police, you may ask? Well, I'm about to answer that question. So every time you connect to a website or a server, your IP address will ping to that server and to that website. So that server and that website automatically has your IP address logged in their system. So now let's say, for an example, you were on Facebook and you did something illegal. All the police would need to do is get the IP address that connected to that server, which would be Facebook. Now, once police have your IP address, or once police have traced the IP to whatever website it was connected to, all they need to do is go to court. So court is a courtroom where there's a judge and there's a lawyer and there's a police prosecutor. Now the judge basically makes the final decision about the law. The judge will determine whether or not people get prosecuted or sent to prison or charged. The judge is basically the boss of the law. The judge makes the final decision. So now all the police need to do is go in a courtroom, stand in front of a judge, and ask the judge for a subpoena for that service provider. So what they will do is they will go in a courtroom and they'll stand in front of a judge and they will say, we have an investigation against this individual. It is believed that this is the IP address of this individual on Facebook that has committed this offense, and we want you to grant us a warrant or a subpoena to give to this service provider, so this service provider can then give us the address which is linked to the IP address and to the account on their system. So all the judge has to do is sign a subpoena with their signature on it, give that to police, and once police have the court order or subpoena or warrant, all they need to do is give that warrant to the service provider and tell the service provider why they are requesting them the address, and then the service provider is obliged by law to give police your home address. So what happens is, once the police get the court order or warrant, they will give it to the service provider. So let's say, for an example, you're with Optus. What the police will do is they will go in a courtroom, stand in front of a judge, and ask the judge to grant them a warrant, subpoena, or court order. Now, once the judge grants the police this kind of document, what the police will do is they will go to Optus or Telstra or Vodafone, depending on whatever provider you're with. And once they go to Optus, for an example, they're going to say to Optus, we are doing an investigation. This individual has committed this offense on Facebook, and it's believed that this IP address is linked to that offense that was committed on Facebook, and we found out that this IP address is coming back to Optus. So we know that this individual that owns this IP address is registered with Optus, is registered with you guys, and we have a court order, a subpoena, a warrant that legally by law requires you to give us the home address that comes up on the account information that's linked to the IP. So the IP address is linked to the account that's registered with that service provider. So let's say, for an example, the IP address was 192.168.0.1. That IP address is linked and registered with a service provider, and it's attached to an account with that service provider. So let's say that IP address was attached to Optus. All Optus have to do is type the IP address in the system, and then once they do that, the account information will come up that is related to that IP address and that is attached and linked to that IP. So all the police need to do, as I said, is get a court order, subpoena, or warrant from the judge in a courtroom, and then all they have to do is provide that court order, warrant, or subpoena to the service provider, which in this case, for an example, is Optus, and then all Optus has to do is then, by law, they are required to open up the account that is attached to that IP address. So Optus, by law, is then obliged to open up the account details and account information attached and linked and associated with that IP address that comes up in their system. So what the police will do is they will give Optus the subpoena, the court order or warrant, and then they will tell Optus that under the warrant and under the court order and under the subpoena, by law, they are required to give police information that comes up on the account. So then what Optus will do is Optus will ask the police, do you know the IP address that you believe is registered with us? Then the police will say, yes, we do. Then Optus will say, can you give us the IP address so we can type it in the system and try to find the account information and account details attached and linked and associated to that IP? And the police will say, okay, this is the IP address, 192.168.0.1. Now, once police give that IP address to Optus, which is the internet service provider, the ISIP, all Optus need to do is type up that IP address on their database, and automatically an account which is linked and associated and attached to that IP address will come up on their database, on their computer. Now, once the account and the account information and details come up on their computer, which is associated and attached and linked to that IP address, all I have to do is give police the details that come up on the account. Now, you may ask, what are those details that will come up on the account? What kind of details will Optus find on the account? So when Optus type up the IP address on their system and the account information comes up, you may ask to yourself, what are those details? What information can Optus find and locate on their computer and database when they search your IP? Now, I'm going to tell you what that information is, and I'm going to tell you what information they will give to police when police request from the service provider the information. Now, the first information that Optus can look up on their system, on their database, which is attached to the IP address, is your first name and your last name, which is basically your full name. The second piece of information they can obtain by searching up your IP address on their database is your age and your date of birth. That's the second piece of information they can obtain. The third information they can obtain is a contact email address. So that's the third information they can obtain. And the fourth information is your home address. Now, you may say to yourself, well, how does Optus have my home address logged on their database, logged on their computer system? How does Optus have my address, and how can Optus get my address and obtain my address and find out where I live based just on my IP address? And you remember how I said earlier that when you register with a service provider, that service provider needs to ship you a physical modem by courier. They need to send you a Wi-Fi box to connect to the internet. You remember how I said earlier in this video, the service provider needs to send you a Wi-Fi modem by post, by courier, so you can connect to the internet? Well, that is exactly why and how the service provider, in this case the ISIP, has your address logged on their system in their database when they search up your IP address that was given by police to the service provider. This is how that service provider has your address and has obtained it and has it on their system and logged on their system and database. This is the reason the service provider has your home address, because when you registered with that service provider needed to ship you a modem. This modem is known as a Wi-Fi router or a Wi-Fi box, or a modem in general, however you want to pronounce it, or however you want to call it, or whatever name you want to give it, that's what it's called. And for that reason, the service provider has your address, because they need to send your physical modem, which will connect you online to the internet, to your home address by courier. So they will ship the modem via post, via courier, and courier will then rock up at your door, at your address, and get you to sign your signature, and then the courier will give your modem, which is the Wi-Fi router, which will connect you to the internet. Now, for the service provider to be able to send you that modem, to ship you that modem via courier, they must have your address. They must know your address. Because if they do not know your address, then how are you going to receive the modem? How do you honestly think Optus is going to send you the Wi-Fi router so you can connect to the internet online if they don't have your address? Clearly, they're not going to be able to send you the modem because they don't have your address. Where are they going to send it to? They can't send it to the wall. They can't send it to thin air. They need to be able to send it to something. So they're going to ask you to give them your address when you sign up with that service provider, so they can then send you the modem via courier, via post, so then you can receive the modem, which is the Wi-Fi box, the router, so then you can connect to the internet online. This is how Optus has your address and has obtained your address, and this is how Optus has your address on their computer and on their database logged in their system. So all police have to do, as I said, is go to court in a courtroom, stand in front of a judge, ask the judge to be granted a court order, a subpoena, or warrant, and then once the judge grants the police that kind of legal document or warrant or court order or subpoena, all police have to do from that point onwards is contact the service provider, tell the service provider the investigation that they are doing and the situation that they're in, and then all they have to do is give the service provider the court order, the subpoena or warrant. Then once they give the service provider that document, the service provider is then obliged by law to give the police any kind of details or information that comes up on their computer in their database, which is associated to that IP address. So once the police have obtained the IP address of that criminal that has committed that internet offence or cyber crime, all the police have to do is give that IP address that they believe is related or in commission of an offence by that criminal. So all they have to do then is then give that IP address to Optus, which is the service provider, the ISIP, and then once they give the IP address to Optus, Optus will type that IP address in their system, and once they type that IP address in their system, the account that is associated to that IP and the account details will come up on their computer associated to that IP address that the police have obtained and have given to Optus, which is the ISIP. Now, once Optus types the IP address on their system, and once Optus pulls up the account information and account details on their computer, which is associated, attached, and linked to that IP, all Optus has to do now is give police that information that they see on their screen, on their computer. So the account details that Optus have pulled up on their computer screen that they can see on their screen, on their computer, they will then give all that information to police when police request so by the service provider. Because as I said, if the police have a court order or a subpoena or warrant, and when police provide that to the service provider by law is obliged and must give the police any details or any information which comes up on the account when Optus pulls it up, when they search the IP address that the police have provided and given the service provider. So once Optus types the IP address and pulls up the account information and details, all Optus has to do is then give the police those details and those information. Now, some of those information and some of those details will be your full name, your date of birth, your age, your contact email, and your residential home address. Now, you may say to yourself, okay, well, once Optus or the service provider, in this case the ISIP, gives the police your home residential address, what can police do from this point onwards? You may ask to yourself. Once police and once law enforcement or detectives or investigators have your home address from Optus or from the service provider that they were given it to or given it from, what can police do with your home address from this point onwards? What can they do with it, you may ask? Now, I'm going to answer that question to you right now. What police can do with your home residential address once they obtain it from the service provider is a couple of things. The first thing they can do is go in front of a judge in a courtroom and ask to be granted a search warrant for that address and for your house and property that could be holded in that house. So once police have obtained your home residential address, and once police have your address from the service provider, from Optus, the ISIP, all the police have to do now, since they have your address and since they know where you live, and since they have obtained your address, all they have to do now is go in a courtroom, stand in front of a judge, and ask that judge in that courtroom to grant them a search warrant to come to your house, to your address, to where you live, and enter in your property and seize items that are related to an offence or a serious offence, or that were used in a commission of a serious offence. So all police have to do now is they will go to court, stand in front of a judge in a courtroom, and ask that judge, whether it's a male judge or a female judge, it doesn't matter. All they will then do is go in a courtroom, stand in front of a judge, and ask that judge to grant them a search warrant. Now, the judge is going to ask them questions to the reason why they want to be granted a search warrant. So the judge will ask these kind of questions. The judge will ask, why do you want me to grant you this search warrant? What other reasons and grounds or suspicions for you to want to be obtained a search warrant? Is there a specific, legitimate, legal reason to why you want me to grant you and give you a search warrant? Then the police will turn around and say, yes, I have a valid reason why. And then the judge will say, can you explain to me the reasons why you want to be granted a search warrant? Then the police will say, these are the reasons. We have a investigation and we basically believe that this criminal has committed a serious offence on Facebook, and we believe that this criminal has committed a crime on social media, a very, very serious offence, and we need to go to his home residential address with the search warrant so we can seize his electronic devices that we believe were used in a commission of a serious offence. So the judge will say, what crime do you... So the judge will then say, what crime do you believe that this criminal has committed? What is the offence that you believe that this criminal has committed? And the police will say, well, we believe that this criminal has hacked into someone's Facebook account and has gained unauthorized access to this person's account, and we believe that this person has hacked into this person's account and has gained unauthorized access to this person's account, and we believe that he has also illegally posted pornography on this person's account without their permission, and we believe that this is a very, very serious offence, and we would like you to grant us a search warrant based on those reasons and suspicions that this person has committed a serious offence. And then the judge will basically say, okay, I believe that that is a valid reason to wanting to be obtained a search warrant, so I'm now going to grant you a search warrant. Would you be able to tell me the address of where you want to execute that search warrant so I can type the search warrant and print it out on the warrant so you can execute that warrant at that home residential address? And the police will say, this is the address. Then the police will give the judge the address that the judge will then print out on the warrant, to where the police will then go to that address and execute the warrant. So what the judge will also do is the judge will ask the police what kind of things they want to be... The judge will ask the police what items the police want to confiscate under the warrant. So the police may say, we want to confiscate all electronic devices. which are computers, laptops, desktops, mobile phones, iPads, tablets, USB flash drives, external hard drives, SSDs, floppy disks, DVDs, CDs, smart TVs, game consoles, Bluetooth devices, Wi-Fi routers, any kind of electronic device that connects to the internet. The police will ask the judge to put those items on the warrant, which will allow the police to seize those items under that warrant. So once the judge asks the police what kind of items they want to seize under the warrant and with the warrant, the judge will then write those items that police want to seize, and the judge will put those items on the warrant. Then the judge will sign the warrant with their signature, whether it's a male judge or female judge. That judge will then write their signature on the warrant, and that is it. The judge has then given the police the search warrant. Now, you may ask yourself, what's the next step for the police? What are the police going to do next once they have your address, and once they have the search warrant granted by the judge? What can the police do next? What is the next step for police once they have obtained a search warrant from the judge and once they have your address? What is the next step for police, you may ask? That's a very good question, and I'm going to answer that question. And the simple question is, all police have to do now is execute that search warrant. So all police have to do now that they have obtained a search warrant from the judge in a courtroom, and now that the police have your residential address from the service provider, and now that the police know where you live and have obtained your residential address from your internet service provider, from your ISIP, and now that the police have also obtained a search warrant which allows them to seize certain items and certain property and assets under the warrant from the judge, all the police have to do now is execute that search warrant. So you may say to yourself, what do you mean by execute that search warrant? What are those terms that you're speaking of such? What does that mean, execute search warrant? Can you please explain to me, you may say? And I will explain right now what that means. Executing a search warrant means for the police to come to your address that they have and show you the warrant and seize items under that warrant. That's what executing that warrant means. So executing that search warrant means police will come to your address, to your home, knock on your door with that search warrant in their hands. And when you open up the door to the police, once they come to your home, to your address, the police will tell you the situation to why they're there and why they are at your home. Then they're going to say, we have a search warrant to enter your property and seize items under the warrant. Then police will show you the warrant. Then you can read the warrant. And when you read the warrant, you can see what items police are allowed to seize under the warrant and what items police are not allowed to seize under the warrant. So if the warrant says we are allowed by this warrant and under this warrant and by law to seize all electronic devices, then the police will then enter in your property, your house or apartment or wherever you live, and they will then start doing an inventory of goods, which means they will search your room, search your whole entire house, until they find every single electronic device that you own, that is in your possession, that is yours, which is called an inventory of goods. They're going to do an inventory of all goods that they believe were used in a commission of a serious offence, in a commission of an offence, under that search warrant. So what they will then do is they will do an inventory of assets that they believe were used in an offence, in a crime committed, in a serious offence, in a commission of an offence. They will do an inventory of goods that they believe were used in an offence committed by that criminal, that they have believed and accused that that criminal has committed that specific offence, that that criminal is accused of committing. So then once the police do an inventory of goods, they will seize all those devices that are at your house and they will confiscate it for further analysis and further forensic investigation by the E-Crime Unit. Now, you may say, what is the E-Crime Unit? What does that mean? Who is the E-Crime Unit and what is the E-Crime Unit? The E-Crime Unit is the Internet Crime Squad investigation. They're basically the cybercrime squad. They're basically the cyber division unit, which means the internet police. They are the internet police, which means police that specifically police the internet online, on the World Wide Web, and police that only and specifically investigate cybercrime. So internet police are police from the police force that only and simply investigate on cybercrime. They do not investigate on any other offense or any other crime. They only simply focus on internet crime. That's why they are called internet police, because they are special police specifically there for criminals that commit cybercrime. So they are called internet police. They are called cyber police. They are called Wi-Fi police. They are called the World Wide Web police. They are also called online police. So you can call them internet police. You can call them cyber police. You can call them Wi-Fi police. You can call them World Wide Web police. And you can also call them cybercrime police. So this is the internet police, the cyber divisions unit. And these police only investigate on cyber-related offences. They do not investigate on any kind of offence. They will only investigate on cyber-related crime. So any crime that is committed on the internet, online, through the World Wide Web, is what these police are trained to do and trained to investigate for. So this is the internet police that will be rocking up at your door with a search warrant to seize all your electronic devices under that warrant if they believe any of those devices were used in a serious offence or were used in a commission of an offence or a serious offence. So that's basically how police will obtain your address through the service provider, as I explained earlier in this video. And this is how the police can be granted and obtained a search warrant by the judge. Now, you may say to you, what's going to happen once the police confiscate your electronic devices under the search warrant? So once police show you the search warrant, and once you read the search warrant that they show you, and once police seize all electronic devices that were used in the commission of an offence under that search warrant, what are police going to do from that point onwards, you may ask? Well, what they're going to do is they're going to send those electronic devices that they seized under the warrant to the E-Crimes Unit, which is the Internet Crimes Investigation Squad. It's the Cyber Divisions Unit. It's the E-Crime Squad, the Internet Crime Squad Unit, which is forensics that investigate internet offences, specifically cybercrime. They are the Internet Forensics Investigations Unit. They're police forensics specifically for internet-related offences and crimes. They're basically forensics for cybercrime. So what the police will do is once they seize all your electronic devices under the search warrant that they believe were used in a commission of an offence, they will then give those items, those assets, those electronic devices to the Internet Crimes Unit, which is the E-Crimes Unit. They will then give that to the forensics, and then the forensics will analyse all the data that is on the hard drive and look through the hard drive to see whether or not there is anything illegal on that hard drive that is stored by the owner that owns that computer or mobile phone. And they are also going to check if there is anything on those electronic devices that is related to the investigation of the police. So if the police have opened up an investigation related to Facebook hacking, and if the police suspect that an individual has hacked into someone else's Facebook account, and if the police believe that that individual has gained unauthorized access to that person's Facebook account, the police will then seize those devices that they believe were used in a commission of that offence, which in this case is unauthorized access to someone's Facebook account. And what the police will do is they will give those electronic devices to the e-crime unit, which is the Internet Crimes Unit. And once they give those devices to the Internet Crimes Unit, the Internet Crimes Unit, which is the Internet Forensics team, will then analyze the hard drive and the devices that the police have seized, and they will look through those devices to check whether or not there is anything related to the hacking of that person's account, or if there's anything related to any kind of Facebook hacking. And if they find any evidence on those devices that are related to hacking or related to unauthorized access to someone else's account, the police will then use that information that they found on those devices against the criminal in a court of law to then prosecute that criminal and to then charge that criminal with charges later on down the track. So that's basically what will happen once the police obtain a search warrant and once police seize your electronic devices under the search warrant that they believe were used in a commission of an offence or a serious offence or involved or related to a crime or current investigation that they are investigating on that involves electronic devices that they believe were used in that crime. So that's basically how the police can obtain your residential home address through the internet service provider simply with your IP address, and that is basically how police can obtain your how police can obtain a search warrant from the judge in a courtroom to then come to your home address that they now have and execute that search warrant and seize your electronic devices under that warrant that they believe were used in a commission of an offence. Now, you may say to yourself, is there a way that I can prevent police, law enforcement, from obtaining my home residential address where I live from the service provider? You may ask and say to yourself, can I stop police and prevent police from obtaining where I live and obtaining my home address from the service provider if police have my IP address? Now, the answer to that question is yes and no. There is a way to prevent police from finding out where you live through your internet service provider. Now, you may say to yourself, how can I prevent police from finding out where I live? How can I prevent police from obtaining my residential home address through my service provider? How can I stop them from finding out where I live, from getting my address with the service provider? I'm going to tell you how you can do that. So when you sign up with a service provider, right, specifically prepaid. Now, I'm going to specifically talk about prepaid here. I'm not going to be talking about home internet. I'm going to be talking about prepaid. So when you walk into a Optus store, for an example, or a Telstra store, and you buy a SIM card, that SIM card will basically have a phone number attached to it. Now, when you top up that SIM card with credit, you have to create an account with that SIM card and register an account associated and attached with that prepaid SIM card, which has credit put on that SIM card. Now, when you go to create an account for that SIM card to top up the credit, it's going to ask for your details. Now, these details that it's going to ask you is your full name, your date of birth, your age, your contact email, and your home address. Now, you see where I'm getting at here? It's going to ask you for your home address. Now, in this section, where it asks you to enter in your address to create an account with Optus or to create an account with Telstra or Vodafone, no matter what the service provider is, when that service provider asks you for your address to create the account, what you're going to do is you're going to put a fake address in this section. So when it says enter in your address, you're not going to put your real address. Now, why, you may ask, are you not going to put your real address? That's because we want to prevent police from obtaining the address from the service provider. We want to prevent police from finding out where you live through the internet service provider, right? So if we want to prevent police from obtaining our address with the service provider, we need to put in a fake address, so when police question that service provider for the address or ask that service provider for that address, the service provider will give them the fake address that you registered with. So what you're going to do is when you sign up for a service provider, when you create an account with that service provider, and when that service provider asks you for your home address, instead of entering your actual legitimate address, you are going to enter in a false address. You are going to enter in a fake address, an address that is false, that doesn't exist. This way, if police obtain a warrant, or if police obtain a court order or subpoena and give that to the service provider, when the service provider pulls up the account information associated to that IP address that the police have, they are going to give police the wrong address. They are going to give police a false address. They are going to give police a fake address. They are not going to give police your actual address. They are not going to tell police where you actually live. Because when you signed up for that service provider and registered for an account, you entered a false address. You entered a fake address. So when police request that address from the service provider, that service provider is not going to be able to give police your actual address. They are not going to be able to give police where you actually live, because when you created an account with that service provider, and when you registered an account with that service provider, and when that service provider asked you for your home address, what did you do? You entered a false address. You entered in a fake address that is not actually your address. It is a fake, false address that doesn't exist. So what will happen is, when police obtain a warrant or a court order or subpoena, and when police give that to the service provider and ask the service provider to give the police the address that comes up on that account, Optus or Telstra or Vodafone, depending on what service provider you're with, will give police a false address. They will give police a fake address. They will not give police your legitimate address. They will not give police your real address. They will not give police where you actually live, because when you registered for an account with that service provider, and when you signed up with that service provider, you entered a fake address. You did not enter a legitimate real address. You did not enter your address. You entered a false address. You entered a fake address. So when the police request those details or the address from that service provider is not going to be able to give police the real address. They are not going to be able to give police the legitimate address. They are not going to be able to give police where you actually live legitimately. And the reason for that is because when you created an account with that service provider, and when you signed up for that service provider on a plan with prepaid, you entered a false address. You entered a fake address. You did not enter your real address. You did not tell that service provider where you actually live. You never told that service provider your real legitimate address. You never told that service provider where you actually live. So that service provider doesn't actually know your address. That service provider doesn't actually know where you live. And the reason they don't know is because you gave them a false address. You gave that service provider a fake address. You presented that service provider and gave them that service provider and told that service provider that this is my address and this is where I live. However, in reality, that's not where you live. That is not your address. That is not where you live. Instead, you have given them a false address. You have given them a fake address that is not actually your address. That is not actually where you live. You have given that service provider a false address, a fake address, an address that is not real, that does not exist at all. You have not given them your real address. You have not given them or told them where you actually live, or what your address actually is. You have not done that. You have given them a false address, a fake address that doesn't exist, that is not real. So when the police grant or obtain a warrant or a court order or subpoena and give that to the service provider and request for the service provider to give police the address that comes up on the account associated and registered with that plan, that internet plan, what is Optus going to give police? Optus is going to give police the fake address. They are not going to give police the real address because you registered with a false address. You registered with a fake address. So the police are clearly, obviously, not going to find out where you live through the service provider. They are not going to know your address. They are not going to know where you live. Police will not be able to find out where you live or what your actual real legitimate address is. They are not going to be able to find out your address. They are not going to be able to know what your address is. And they are not going to be able to know where you live or find out where you live or locate you. They will not be able to do that. So this is a way that you're able to prevent police from obtaining your address and knowing your address. And this is a way to prevent police and law enforcement from finding out where you live or from getting your address from the internet service provider, the ISIP. This is one way that you are able to prevent police from obtaining your address. And that one way is simply registering an account with a service provider with false details, with false information. And by doing so, you are able to prevent police from obtaining your address and from finding out where you live by asking the service provider those kind of information. So that's basically how police are able to obtain your home address through your service provider with your IP address. And that's how police are able to be granted a search warrant to seize your electronic devices. And this is how you are able to prevent police from obtaining your address, so they can't find out where you live. So that's it, guys. That is the end of this video. That's how police are able to find out where you live through your service provider, and this is how police are able to be granted a search warrant by the judge to seize your items and your electronic devices, and this is how you prevent police from obtaining your address. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment below, and tell me what you thought about this video. And don't forget to share this video to let other people know how police obtain your address. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time in the next video, peace out for now. Bye.